So this is the masthead of William Lloyd Garrison's original abolitionist newspaper, but it's colorized because it's the Liberator dot today. We are 1 week away from moving to Canada. When I was selling off a good portion of my books, I found one that struck my interest and that I had failed to read when it was on my shelves. I pulled it off the pile. The famous conservationist Jane Goodall grew up in a devout Congregationalist home in Bournemouth, England. Her spiritual journey is a decidedly Christian one, and she has obviously given a great deal of thought to the subject of hope. In chapter 15 of Reason for Hope, A Spiritual Journey, Goodall finally lists those reasons. My reasons for hope are fourfold, she writes. But she can't find it in herself to stop there. Goodall immediately follows on with chapter 16, entitled Beyond the Holocaust. And yes, it's about the Jewish Holocaust, a subject that had troubled her since her childhood during the war. A subject which serves for her as a metaphor of what is happening to her beloved chimp and wildlife populations. Her 4 reasons for hope in chapter 15 quickly meet the abyss of chapter 16. She knows she still needs what we are calling radical hope. My name is Lowell Bliss, and this is episode 28 of the Liberator's Today's video series on hope. Since September 2010, I have been fascinated by the pronouncements that environmental leaders make about hope. It was in that month that I attended my first Prairie Festival out at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. Speakers that year included Wendell Berry, Wes Jackson, Scott Russell Sanders, Sandra Steingraber, and Josh Farley. Some of you will recognize that these names are a truly remarkable lineup of heavy hitters. After each speaker was finished and the question and answer time was opened up, hands shot up, and almost invariably the first question asked every time was, "Where do you find hope?" Wendell Berry, I recall, gave some variation of his standard answer that hope is a duty. If we love the land and the people who live on it, what choice do we have but to keep on hoping? Other speakers mentioned finding hope in the proliferation of local efforts, such as farmers markets. Hope in the passion and resolve of youth was a common answer. Still others found hope in some technological breakthrough, like the latest advancement at the Land Institute itself to grow perennial grains and polycultures. I walked away unsatisfied. Sure, it felt good to move a few feet away from hopelessness, and it felt nice to momentarily hunker down in the protective shadow of an authority like Wendell Berry. But still, the ecological abyss that loomed seemed more than what a proliferation of farmer markets could handle. My reasons for hope are fourfold, Jane Goodall writes in chapter 15. Number 1, the human brain. Number 2, the resilience of nature. Number 3, the energy and enthusiasm that is found or can be kindled among young people worldwide. And number 4, the indomitable human spirit, unquote. She then supplies 20 pages of fascinating and, yes, genuinely hopeful explanation of these 4 reasons for hope. One anecdote she shares is about Sudbury, Ontario. Goodall writes, quote, 2 years ago I gave a lecture in Sudbury, in Canada. For 100 years, the toxic emissions from a nickel mine had polluted the environment for miles around. I saw photos of a countryside that looked as barren as a lunar landscape. Yet all around me it was lush and green. The citizens, finally realizing that their health as well as their environment were at risk, had decided to do something about it. The mine had reduced its emissions by 98% in about 15 years. As a symbol of hope, they gave me a feather from one of the peregrine falcons that once again nested there after being locally extinct for more than 40 years, unquote. It's a great story, and particularly meaningful for me. Whereas the nickel was mined in Sudbury, it was shipped through the Great Lakes and then processed in Port Colborne, polluting that town as well, including the very property that we are moving into on August 1st. Port Colborne, Ontario, too, has been cleaned up. And yes, Dr. Goodall, my family has the human brain, the resilience of nature, the vigor of youth, and the indomitable human spirit to thank. I looked at the copyright of Jane Goodall's book, 1999. That's a long time ago. What has transpired on her planet since then? And would brains and nature and kids and spirits be adequate for the challenge? One example is that in 2017, the American Journal of Primatology published a study claiming that the overall Western chimpanzee population declined from 6% annually between 1990 and 2014, a total decline of 80.2%. In response to this finding, the International Union of the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, elevated the subspecies status to critically endangered on its red list of threatened species. That wasn't true back in 1999. And as for climate change, what Goodall calls the 1998 Kyoto Summit on Clean Air was only 1 year old at the time she wrote her book. Like the rest of us, she would soon be watching the Kyoto Protocol die a long, slow death. Nonetheless, in 2017, even after the Paris Agreement, Goodall sat on a climate panel and a little girl in the balcony asked her a question. Do you have hope in the future? Yes, Goodall answered. I definitely have hope in the future for 5 reasons. And then she extended her palm out, 5 fingers spread, as if she were comforting her favorite young chimp at Gombe. She repeated her 4 reasons, and then she added a 5th, social media. Its ability to bring large groups of people together worldwide, particularly into climate protest marches, which was her main example. Social media. What is unfortunate about this exchange is that Jane Goodall already had a 5th reason for hope, tucked away in chapter 16 of her book, Reason for Hope. What do we have when we come to the end of farmers markets, perennial grains, the human brain, nature's resiliency, youth's vigor, the indomitable human spirit, protest marches, and the organizing power of human media, social media? What do we have? The only way we'll find out is if we allow ourselves to contemplate the Holocaust, as Goodall does in chapter 16 of her book, and as we will do in episode 29. So it's important you come back next week as we revisit the spiritual journey, the reason for hope of a remarkable human being, Dr. Jane Goodall. I'm Lowell Bliss, Christian environmental missionary and climate activist. Thank you for visiting the Liberator today.